that the uprising and social unrest had really found its way to the third precinct, which is the issuing precinct for the officers that were involved in George Floyd's arrest and killing. And the caller asked if the church would consider opening our doors to become the medic station for the neighborhood. And it was a big ask because, like so many communities of faith, we had really closed down our facility, trying to be a good neighbor in the midst of COVID and slow the spread in our own community. In about a matter of 20 minutes, made the decision to go from doors sealed shut to doors propped wide open. And we began serving as the medic station for the neighborhood. And we did that for several days and nights through kind of the height of the unrest in the Longfellow neighborhood. And thinking back to those days, there was so much righteous anger filling the streets. There was so much chaos, so much tear gas. The injuries were great for those people who were coming in to seek medical attention, and the fires were all around us. And so those days and nights were really traumatic for all of us who were there and for the whole community that was experiencing either it firsthand or the world that was experiencing it watching the news, because we know that everybody's eyes were on our portion of the city during those days. And after the smoke cleared, we then found that our next faithful response was to become the basic food and necessities distribution for the neighborhood. Our groceries, we had gone from being this food-rich community to being a food desert overnight, so we no longer had access to groceries or Target or Walgreens, and people were really having trouble using public transportation because of all of the blockades and other hurdles that were put into place in our area of Minneapolis. And so we started to just serve as this mutual aid center of sorts. And we've never served as a food pantry. We've never served as a resource center. And so we were just learning as we went. It was, I've never known the ending before we began something this past year. Everything has been learning on the fly. And the first day, there were a couple of hundred people that we served. The next day, that number doubled. The next day, that number doubled. The next day, that number doubled. So we were serving about anywhere between, I'd say, on average, 1,500 to 2,000 people or households a day in those days that then stretched over the course of the summer. For several months, we served in that capacity. And we, as I think back about everything that has transpired for our community over these past months, it has been a couple of things come to my mind. By the time I got to the church on that first night during the height of the unrest, the doors were propped open and neighbors were stationed outside of our doors where ushers would typically stand. And I thought, this is a picture of a new vision for the church. It's not an insider outsider model. It's the walls become more permeable. A colleague of mine calls it the church turned inside out. And so we've gotten a taste of that, because nothing we've done, of course, would have been possible without that model this past year. Right. It's not a new vision of the church. It's the vision that we were given. And then I think somehow we've um, and I'll just speak for my own community in a predominantly white denomination and congregation. There's this sense that um, we've morphed it into something else. So it's really a reclamation of what we were given. So, um, the it's like I'm not making up anything new. I'm just like in some ways returning to these stories and to the narrative that we're giving, and looking again at them and saying, what is what is the church being called to? What is Jesus teaching here? How is Christ leading the way into a new way of being in the world? And it's hard work. It's hard work, but we're trying to do it. There's something about the way that we have been trained that causes us to either shut down or kind of shatter or fracture when we hear about the pain of another, particularly pain that we haven't experienced ourselves in quite the same way. One of the things that the church is called to do is move away from this sense of scarcity. So I think when you say, when I hear about a neighbor's pain that's not like my own, that quick move that I make to move to my own pain and say, well, what about, X, Y, and Z that I've endured? I think that often arises out of this scarcity mindset, and it lives in me, it lives in all of us, that like somehow the world is a pie, and if somebody takes a piece out of it, there's less of it for me, like there's less compassion left for me or something like that. And instead, if we moved to and the church always talks about this, a move towards abundance, like there's more than enough compassion in this world. God plants more than enough empathy in this world for all of us. Then maybe we come at those conversations with reservoirs that are filled rather than reservoirs that are depleted. And it allows us to really just hear the neighbor without feeling like somehow it takes something away from us, from me. So I really appreciate that point. There's what the church is called to do is shape a new worldview where we can stand in solidarity in joy and in suffering with one another. And solidarity doesn't mean that we've experienced what another person is saying, but it means that we believe what another person is saying is true, and we stand beside them in what they're experiencing.
At the beginning of our conversation, you one of the describing words you used for your congregation is that they are activists. And the word activist can be a politically charged term, and probably rightfully so, because whatever side you're an activist with or against, you're fighting for something. And I'm wondering what you have learned in this past year about activism, maybe your own or the kind of activism your congregation has been engaged in.
I think it's been important for me to try to be a follower. So find amazing Black, Indigenous people of color who are leading, who have vision, who already have a sense of the way that the world could be reshaped in order to make it a more equitable space for them and for people in their communities. And I think so. Being an activist for our congregation has often meant that like we're out on the front line and we're the ones with the, what are they called?
The
The
bullhorn
the
or
bullhorn. Yeah,
megaphone.
yeah. We're the ones with the microphone. And this year it's been much more of a process of listening to the community, listening to our BIPOC neighbors, and seeing how it is that we can use what we've got, people, resources, time, energy, space, building. We still have a building for the sake of the community. And so being an activist, I think we've learned something new this year, that we're testing muscles of being followers.
What